I want to, very excited about introducing our keynote speaker. Some of you have already met her. Her name is Meghann Perry, and she's the founder of Revolution Recovery. And you'll find out why it's called Revolution Recovery, because she's a revolution. So anyways, I want to introduce Meghann Perry.
Good morning. Utah. I was on my way here this morning and I saw a billboard that said, it's Miller time, Utah. And I thought, it's recovery time, Utah. Woo! Right? I'm really excited to be here. I'm not nervous at all. I don't have to pee or blow my nose or drink another gallon of water. Totally fine. I do want to thank the Latino Behavioral Health Services, USARA, Utah Association of Peer Support Specialists, for bringing us all together and for bringing me here. I was very humbled and honored to be asked to do this. So I'm very grateful to be here. So I'm a person in recovery. The best way for you to understand a little bit about my recovery journey is to hear a story. So Daniel, if you could play the video, please.
And action.
My dad and I were both.
The heavy metal maroon door slams shut.
Moment of clarity. Going to the bar.
Expecting my mother always to be.
I knew it was my dad's last Christmas, but still, I'm sitting in my car, snorting lines in the hospital parking lot, just avoiding going in because I didn't want to face him and his death. And so I waited too long, and I missed Christmas dinner, and I rushed in and made excuses and rushed out, and I left. And I didn't go back to see him until the middle of March when my stepmother called, and she said, "Meghann, you need to come now." So I went, and he was there in a hospital bed in his living room, just slowly dying of cancer. And when I looked down in that hospital bed and I saw the tiny just sliver of a man that was in there, I didn't feel anything because that wasn't my dad. My dad was a giant. He was larger than life. He loved to have a good time. He was strong and charismatic, and he would chop wood and sail boats, and he would dance around the living room to the Rolling Stones, singing and clapping and going, "Come on, Meghann, dance with me." So I sat with him. I sat with him and watched the tides go in and out on the river below. And I watched and waited for the bald eagle to come and sit in the tree outside the window like it did sometimes. My dad and I, we loved the blues and birds. After 4 days, I left. And I don't remember saying goodbye to my dad, but I do remember stealing his OxyContin on the way out the door. And I went home and I got high, and I got so high that I couldn't answer the phone when my stepmother called 2 days later. And I didn't call her back for another 2 days after that. And she just said, "Meghann, you don't need to come now. It's over." And I hung up that phone and I sat on my bed and surrounded by paraphernalia and wreckage and active addiction, filthy apartment, and I couldn't feel anything, and I couldn't cry. I just got high. And I got high, and I tried to make everything go away. And as always, it worked in the beginning until it didn't. And I was just left, just completely devastated, more devastated than I'd ever been before. But that's when things started to change. And now I have this crazy, incredible life in recovery. And I like to think that somehow that's because of my dad.
I share that as a video because I'm grateful today that I can feel things. And sometimes I have to take care of myself and not tell a story live because it's too hard. And this is one of those times. Storytelling is how we connect with each other. It's the oldest form of communication, from cave art to TikTok, is storytelling. So every post on social media is a story. It's how we communicate with each other. You're all expert storytellers and you're all expert story listeners. We've been telling stories forever. It's how we convey norms and pass on culture and traditions. It's how we learn. It's how we problem solve. It's how we make meaning of things. It is the foundation of society and community. And it comes in many, many different forms: music, art, spoken word, TV, movies, social media. We've been trying to figure out the story behind Mona Lisa's smile for 500 years, right? There's a story. Why is Mona Lisa so continue to beguile us? Because we can't figure out what she got going on with that expression. Even Lil Wayne wrote a song called Mona Lisa. Mona Lisa, Mr. Carter. So, stories bind us together. It's how we are connected. It's how we know we belong. I listen to you to find me. So, I recently read a book by Valerie Kaur called See No Stranger. It's a memoir and manifesto of revolutionary love. And she talks about how we're connected with each other through story. And she says, "You are a part of me I do not yet know." We are all connected. And so when I see you, I'm going to learn about you. I'm going to wonder about you, because within you is a part of me that I do not yet know. I listen to you to find me. It's a very powerful way to connect us. And one of the most powerful things that we can do is listen to each other. Really listen to each other. Listen not so that I can change you, but so that I can be changed by you. Listen not so I can change you, but so that I can be changed by you. In the storytelling work that I do, one of the exercises, which we'll do later on in the workshop, is to have 3 minutes to share with a partner uninterrupted. The partner's not allowed, the listener can't say anything. And I challenge you in your life to try and do that. To just listen without interrupting. And as peers, I'll tell you, one of the most powerful things that you can do when you're listening to somebody you're supporting is don't talk when the pause comes. When they've shared and they stop and there's that pause, just let it be. Because what comes after the pause is really what's going on. It's really what they needed to say. But we spend so much time being busy. Well, I got to offer you this. I got to do this. I got to do that. But when we just listen and we give that space and time, because we know, right? If you're a peer, we treat people as resources. The answers are already there. We just are listening and giving a space for the person to find them. So that pause, I encourage you to use the pause. So the power of story is in how you tell it. The power of storytelling is in how you tell the story. So how many of you share stories on a regular basis? Yeah, this should be everybody. How many of you share stories as part of your support for others in your role? How many of you have taken the time to think about how you tell a story in your role? Nice. And how many of you have really spent time thinking about how it's getting received? Yeah. We can be really, really intentional with our story sharing and have greater impact. So, besides you, who's telling your story? Feel free to speak up. Who's telling your story besides you? Did you say kids? Oh. Friends and family? Media, the community, criminal justice. What's that? People we inspire, yeah. Our boss. The guy with the megaphone, whoever he is, some random dude shouting about you. There's a lot of people telling our story. There's a story being told about me, compliments of the Penobscot County, Maine Drug Enforcement Administration in 2008. I recently got, after, I figured it out on my way here, 30 years or something like that, somewhere around 30 years, I finally got 30 years of a criminal record expunged. Recovery is possible. And in that process, I got this stack of papers of everything that was written about me in that 30 years. Whew. I did not feel that that was a very accurate representation of me. I did some of the things they said, but not the way that they said them. So, and I got this really beautiful picture. So, we have other people telling our stories all the time, right? Documentation, right? Medical providers, the criminal justice system, every, behavioral health person you've ever been with. And we start to internalize those stories, right? I've been to something like, I lost count, but somewhere between 20 and 30 detoxes and rehabs in my years that I was struggling. And I got asked the same questions over and over. What are all the worst things that ever happened to you? Were you sexually abused as a child? Have you had trauma? How many incarcerations have you had? How many detoxes have you had? Have you been a victim of domestic violence? And this is my favorite for the women. How many pregnancies have you had? And how many children do you have? Think about that. What's in between? How many pregnancies and how many children? Probably a lot of heartbreak. Also, what's between that is none of your goddamn business. The worst things that happen to us are documented over and over and over and over. And we start to internalize those stories. And they become our own stories. And we repeat them. And my story became addict felon. I lived inside a box. Society helped me build the box, and then I reinforced it. And I lived inside this box called addict felon for a very long time. Even into recovery, I still was defined by my struggle, defined by the worst things that ever happened to me. We get stuck in these stories with no room to breathe. Right? We get trapped within these narratives, this single narrative. I say, I'm going to tell my story like it's one story. It's not one story. We're thousands of stories. I am not defined by my recovery story. And every time I get asked, you tell your story, I say, which one? Should I tell about being a mom? Should I tell about loving horses growing up? Oh no, we want to know about your addiction and your recovery. Yeah, I don't feel like talking about that today. I got more stories than that. So here's a story about me. In 2009, I was declared by the federal government as chronically homeless. I had not had a certificate of any kind of achievement for a very long time, so I was very proud of this. And it would have got me housing, except I lived in a rural area, and the only housing place would not take felons. So that did me a whole fat lot of good. But this became part of my story, and I was proud of this. It was a badge of honor because I had nothing else to be proud of. I had nothing else that defined me that I could tell you about, except how bad I was. This became my story. Oh, I was homeless the most time. I went to detox more times than you. I sold the most drugs. I had the most money. I, got arrested most times. It's all I had to define me. And so other people were telling that story about me. I was telling that story about me. And I loved to be a victim. Poor me. I was doing advocacy work for years, criminal justice reform and recovery advocacy work, and I was telling the story of me, my story, from inside the addict felon box, and I made people feel really bad for me, and it was very effective. A lot of wealthy white people felt really bad for this poor little white girl, and they just donated a lot of money. But what that was doing was keeping me inside the box, and keeping me inside this victim mindset of telling my story from this place of poor me, that all these bad things happened to me. I had no power in that. So let's talk about where we find our stories. Here's a couple of examples of other ways that I could tell my stories from. I was a big one for bravado, culture of scarcity, trying to find some ego in them, and there's good ones there too. So where do you learn to tell your stories, your recovery stories? The rooms, yeah. My first place to start telling stories was jail. Yeah, so boring. Nothing to do but tell stories about some bullshit that isn't even true, about all the things I have on the outside, right? Because I got nothing inside. I got nothing to hold me up and make me a person. That's all I've got is my stories. So I started there, got the whole bravado thing going on. And then I moved into 12-step. I got into 12-step, and I told the story that I needed to tell to fit in. I needed a place to belong. I needed belonging so bad. I needed to be loved. And I found that in the rooms of the 12-step fellowships. And so I talked the way they talked. I learned how to tell stories that way, right? Experience, strength, and hope. What happened, what it was like, what happened, and what it is now. It was bad, I changed, now it's great. Right? It's a formula. And it works really, really, really well in 12-step. It does a great job of helping us make sense of everything and helping us find belonging. And I started to speak the language, right? Sick and tired of being sick and tired. I took the cotton out of my ears and stuck it in my mouth, and I jumped in my sponsor's back pocket and I went to 90 meetings in 90 days. I never did that. I probably said I did a bunch of times, though. So I found what I needed in 12-step. And the same went for church. I could go to prison for 5 years or go to Christian rehab for a year. Obviously, I went to Christian rehab and started going to church, right? And so I started talking about, I'm blessed. I'm going to turn my test into a testimony. And so those were places that I learned to tell stories, and those were all good within that culture. But there's a little bit of a problem with that. Richard Stone is a guy who wrote a book called The Healing Art of Storytelling. And he looked at 12-step quite a bit. And now I love 12-step. I love 12-step, but I'm going to pick on it a little bit. Only in terms of storytelling. What happens is we get into this kind of single narrative, right? We tell our story over and over and over and over and over. And it might, it might differ a little bit, right? Pull different things in or whatever, but it's essentially the same story. Experience, strength, and hope. Experience, strength, and hope. And again, it works really, really well in 12-step, but then it becomes all of who I am. And what happens is it becomes overly simplified and overly redemptive. And by redemptive, I mean I was like this and now I'm in recovery. I was bad, now I'm in recovery. Everything's great and okay. Right? It kind of like, I was so bad, and then a miracle happened. Then I'm in recovery. And it's gravy, baby. And it's not that that's untrue, but it just leaves out a whole lot of who I am. And it becomes this narrow box. It becomes another box for me to live in. The other thing that it does, and this is deep for me, is that it creates an us and them dynamic. How do you refer to yourself, right? When you're telling your story and you're talking about your past self, your other self, your active addiction self. Do you say that you were bad? That you were sick? You had a disease or disorder? My best thinking got me here. I was a mess. I was a disaster. I lied to everybody. I didn't care about anybody. I had no morals or values. I was a terrible person. I was a piece of shit. Do you understand that when you talk about your past self in that way, you're talking about all the people who are struggling in the present? When I talk badly about my past self, I'm saying to every single other person that's listening that has not achieved their recovery goals yet, that they are that they are a piece of shit, that they have no morals and values, that they don't care about anybody. I know that one of the hardest parts of my active substance use was how deeply I cared about how much I was hurting people. I hated how I hurt people. It mattered very deeply to me. And I had values, and I had morals. I just couldn't live by them. And that caused a lot of agony. And that made me want to use some more. But when we talk about when we say we had no morals or values and we didn't care who we hurt, I don't think that's true. I think we do care. But we have this way, we learn this way of talking about those past selves as if they're not me, as if they're some other person. And it creates this dynamic of the before and the after, of the us and them, the ones who don't get it yet. They're not ready. They're not trying hard enough. They're not willing. They won't do the work. You see, it works if you work it. But when you really think about what that's saying, is that it's your fault that you don't get it. Because it works if you work it. This is a perfect program. It's not AA's fault. It's you. If 12-step was a perfect program, the death rate would not be what it is. People are dying because there aren't enough options. People are dying for a lot of reasons. But we can't overlook the fact that some of them are dying because there isn't a place for them yet. We haven't figured out how to provide a place of belonging that works for everybody. And when we pledge allegiance to 12-step, unquestionably, we're telling people that it's their fault that it doesn't work for them. And I get it. We pledge allegiance to the thing that saved our lives. It makes sense. But I have to remember that my experience is not your experience. My experience is only my experience. And so as we're going out in the world outside of the halls and we're sharing stories and we're talking about our experience, we have to think about how are we talking about it, and are we talking about it in a way that creates an us and a them. This guy. Right? There's only one way. The dude's on the steps. Sorry, buddy, you're not trying hard enough. If you're not over here, you're not, I can't help you. So when we repeat the narratives that we learn in 12-step, we continue this kind of idea. And we have this internalized stigma that I have about these past selves. So I get into recovery and I feel like I was driving down the road, right? And there were, it was like I was tossing all these other me's out the window onto the side of the road, like discarded trash. Oh, that's not me anymore. That's not me. That wasn't me. That was some other person. I'm different now. But those were me. Those are me. And it wasn't until I started doing storytelling work that I got to go back and find all of those past selves and collect them up and bring them back into me. And I'll talk about that in a moment. So 12-step is so dominant that it becomes sort of the only narrative. It's a single culture, and that is reflected in the recovery movement. Like, do I have time to go in on this? I love the recovery movement. Yeah! There is so much amazing work that's been done and is being done, and we've come so far. I went to my first detox in 1995. It was a completely different world. The recovery movement has done incredible, incredible things. But it is dominated by a single culture. 40 to 60, 70, 80-year-old, white, mostly men, well-to-do, right? I fit the category. I fit the category. So I am wearing that privilege right now. I am part of that dominant culture. Inconveniently, I'm queer, so that kind of like messes it up a little. But mostly I'm in the dominant culture. So I am talking about myself too. But this sort of 12-step, like the old white boys network. Anybody familiar with like thinking of like, I remember walking into a meeting, at 22 and being like, oh my good Lord, it's all old white men, right? And so it's changing. The face of recovery is definitely changing, but we're still in this kind of like dominant culture, and that needs to change. That's the revolution. Yeah. It is time. It is time to change that single narrative. Because is there anybody in here who's not a 40 to 70-year-old white person with money? Then the hands go up. Right? We're not all represented by this. We're not all represented by this dominant culture. But we don't leave a lot of room. Hello. Javier is very important. He needed to take that call. So what's getting left out? How many people with physical disabilities do you know in recovery? A lot? How many of them are working as peers? How many are in leadership positions and very visible in the recovery movement? Have you ever seen anyone in a wheelchair as a leader? Yay! I haven't, but that's amazing that you have. But the point being is it leaves out so many people, right? That dominant culture, that dominant narrative, it leaves a lot of us out. But we have the power to change it. That's the revolution. Yeah. Most of the people from like the current recovery movement, which started right around 98, 2000, with the SAMHSA funding recovery community organizations, that movement that brought us to here, they're all retiring. They're at retirement age. And I love a lot of them. I love so many of them. But it's kind of cool. There are some new opportunities, right? Thank you, Bill White and Phil Valentine, right? And all the others, thank you. You may go play golf now. No, Phil's a very good friend of mine. And so I say that so lovingly. But it's a time, it's a chance for us to change the narrative and to change recovery culture. How do we do that? Stories. Storytelling is a very powerful way for us to change that culture. How do we do that? By stepping outside of the boxes of addict, felon, or whatever yours is labeled, and just becoming human and telling human stories. I shared that story about my dad for two reasons. One, so you could get to know me a little bit, because that's the quickest way for you to kind of say, oh, okay, yep, she's one of us. Whew. But also because that's a very human story. You don't have to be in recovery or to have struggled with substance use or mental health to relate to that story, to feel like you let somebody down, to feel like you were absent from an important thing, to feel like you ran away from something, right? That's universal stuff. And the universal language, the most universal language is feelings. Literally every single human being who has ever walked the earth has feelings. It's about the only thing that we can be 100% sure of is that we have feelings, and that's the universal human language. So when we get out of the tropes and we get out of the cliches, I'm telling you, if you know, and that's when I surrendered. Well, what the hell does that mean? That's when you surrendered. I have this vague notion of what that might mean, but what does it mean to you? How did it feel to surrender? What did that look like? Because that's where I find the part of me I do not yet know, is in the specific and the emotional in your story. I want to tell you a story about Kathy. So I teach recovery storytelling. It's an 8-hour class that I created what feels like a gazillion years ago. And people come in, it's an 8-hour workshop. They choose a story and they sort of work on the story over the course of the 8-hour workshop. And in that time, it transforms the story and their relationship to the experience that they're telling about. So Kathy came in. This was in February. There were 2 women in the workshop who lost children. You don't have to be in recovery from substance use. You can be recovering from whatever you name for yourself to be in the workshop. So one of them was a woman named Anne-Marie in England, whose daughter Martha took MDMA for the 4th time and overdosed and died on MDMA at 15 years old. But it had been 9 years and she'd done a lot of work. So for her, she had a little more perspective and distance. Kathy lost her daughter Emily at age 21, just 2 years ago, to a fentanyl overdose after struggling with substance use for a couple years. Kathy started to tell the story in the workshop, and the story she was telling wasn't hers. It was, fentanyl is evil. It was, we need to lock up all the dealers and send them away forever, like as if there aren't going to be 50 more right behind them. Doesn't work. You know, fentanyl killed my child. Fentanyl is evil. Fentanyl is evil. Fentanyl is evil. So I had an opportunity to coach her a little bit during the session. And I pushed back on that a little. And what happened is a completely different story that emerged. And Kathy thought about hummingbirds. Because hummingbirds had been present from when she was pregnant with Emily, all through Emily's life, and they still were. And so the story radically changed, and it was about her relationship with these hummingbirds and how they represented Emily to her and how she feels like Emily visits her still through these hummingbirds. So it became Kathy's story and Emily's story. It became a human story that we can all relate to. Sure, fentanyl is evil, but it's not even fentanyl's fault. Don't get me started about all of that stuff. That's part of the revolution too, but that's a different talk. So when we get to the human part, now people can relate to Kathy's story, and they're going to figure out what it means for themselves. What Kathy said after that is, "This set my soul free." Those were her exact words. "This set my soul free." Because she was telling society's story. She was telling the story that society was telling her about why her daughter died, instead of just telling the story of her daughter. Kathy and Emily were lost in that, and they got found in the new story, a human story about hummingbirds and feelings and being human and having a human experience. So, how do we do this? We have to go back and investigate. We have to deconstruct the stories. So take that stale kind of narrative that you've been telling forever and start peeling back the layers. Start getting in there and looking at it again and reconstruct the story that's much more true. Cut out the cliches. Cut out the I was so detached from my story. I told my story so many times. I was doing advocacy. I was in like CBS News documentary with Michael Botticelli. I was speaking at Harvard Law School, the State House, all this fancy stuff over and over and over and over and over, and I did not feel a thing. Right? And part of the revolution for me through storytelling is that just watching my own story, which I've seen so many times, right, about my dad, is I'm feeling the feelings. I'm connecting with it. That's the difference. Is that I went back to that experience with my dad and I investigated. I got a little gnarly with it. I took it apart and I tried to find a deeper truth in it. Because a bad thing happens, right? And we create a story around it. And it's usually right within that thing happening. So it's like when the thing is happening or right in the aftermath of the thing. So if I have a terrible thing happen and then I'm creating a story around it right away while I'm still in the thing, while I'm still unsafe, while I'm still in maybe a trauma response or whatever, I'm telling the story that I need to at that time to protect me. Because our stories can protect us. Right? We tell the story that protects us. We tell the story we need to at the time. I told the story that I needed to. I was a perpetrator of domestic violence so that I didn't have to be a victim. I threw the first punch. Didn't matter that he beat the crap out of me afterwards. But I needed to be the perpetrator so I wasn't the victim. That's what I needed to do for myself. And then I told stories being a victim, so I didn't have to own any of the stuff that was going on, right? That was what protected me. And then I told stories as a badass, right? The badass story protected me from having to acknowledge how scared I was. I lived my whole life in total fear. I had all the crazy things happen. I sold lots of drugs. I had guns to my head. I was dealing with gang. All of the scary, scary things. I was terrified all the time. But, I was a badass. I was the bravest, crazy-ass white girl dealing with the all the gangs in Boston and all this stuff, right? I needed to tell that story because I couldn't look at how scared shitless I was the entire time. And I only did those things out of pure desperation. So we tell the stories that protect us until, you know what, I don't need to be protected from that crap anymore. I'm okay, I'm safe. Now I can go back and look at all the things, the choices that I made and how desperate I was and how I felt like I had no other choices. So, what are you protecting yourself from in your stories, in the way you talk about your experiences? Feelings, exactly, right? Feelings is usually the number one thing. Or a sense of vulnerability, right? Vulnerability is a superpower, by the way. It is a superpower. You get a little vulnerable, and you connect with people. People can connect with that. So, a few things to know about really powerful storytelling. Have compassion for yourself. When I look back at the woman that did all those crazy things, I feel love for her. All those discarded selves along the side of the road, I go back and I pick them up really tenderly and very lovingly. And I do my best to understand them, to love them, to have mercy for them, instead of telling them they're horrible and bad. I tend those wounds. And I hold the space for all that person, that woman that I was in that moment of whatever it is I'm looking at. For her shame, for her pain, for her loss. And with love and forgiveness for her. The woman who walked out of my dad dying, more concerned about stealing the OxyContin than saying goodbye to him for the last time, which I knew was the last time, she needs love. She needs compassion. She needs forgiveness. Because if I had told you that story the way I used to tell it, you would just feel really bad for me and you'd just be like, whoa. But the way that I shared it with you now, I hope you connected with her and you understood her a little and you could have some compassion and forgiveness for her. Because if I'm out there telling my story from a place of shame, then everybody's going to feel shame about me. If I'm telling it from a place of love, you're going to feel the love. Embrace complexity. So, again, those simplistic ones. Oh, I was so bad, then I had a miracle, and now I'm great. Right? The reality is it's really messy. Ask questions, not answers. There's no answers, right? Why did old me steal the OxyContin? I mean, I could say I just wanted to get high or whatever, but I don't really know all about what was going on for that person at that time. I'm just seeking to understand. Every character in your story, including you, is very complicated. Drug dealers are not just evil people. I don't know if I'm alone here and everybody else was a drug supplier. We're complicated people. There was a whole thing not too long ago about kill your local heroin dealer. That hurt. I was genuinely hurt by that. I mean, we're laughing, but I was like, dude, ouch. Because I'm way more complex than that. I'm not just this evil, sinister person trying to kill people with my heroin dealing. I was trying to find a way to live where I didn't have to harm other people to get the drugs that I felt like I couldn't live without, right? So there's complexity in all of it. Be okay that it's messy, that it's not sealed up with a bow. You don't need to end your stories with this I did in my dad's story, but you don't have to do that. The next one is let go of the morals. right? We like to sort of have a moral at the end of the story. And the moral of this story of redemption is drugs are bad, recovery is good. It's none of my business what you think or feel or what meaning you derive from my story. That's none of my business. What my business is what meaning I derive from it. All I need to worry about is what it means to me, and I'm just going to tell it as true as I know how. And I'm going to try to be authentic, and I'm not going to try to convince you of anything about me, because I just want you all to like me. Like, I really just want you all to like me. It's like one of the most fundamental human things in the world, is just we just want to be liked, and we want to belong. So I would tell stories that I'd try to make you think certain things about me, that I was really scary and courageous and badass, right? Or that I'm really smart, or that whatever the thing is. But when I can just say, this is what's true. I did that thing to my dad. I did that. You're going to think what you think about me, but I'm not as concerned about that. It's about how I feel about me. So, be universal, right? Be inclusive with our storytelling. Get rid of the pathway language, because that doesn't mean shit to people outside of 12-step. So just use real, regular words. I was really, really broken. I felt so broken inside that I felt like I couldn't possibly go on. And I felt like I was just laying on the floor and that I could either die or I could get up and do something about it. And so, I don't know. I couldn't imagine just letting myself die, so I got up. That's what surrender looked like for me. That's universal. Everybody's been on the floor going, I cannot go on. I cannot do this. I cannot. So be universal. Think about the universal human experience. Get rid of all the pathway language. That just separates us from them. Us and them. And get gnarly with it. Get like these ladies. Get in there, get a shovel, dig around, right? Have the courage to go deeper. Dig into the hard stuff. Do it with support. So if you're like me, I don't know if anybody has like a super long, crazy trauma history, right? So I don't take it lightly to go back and dig. You need to do this in the way that is safe for you and feels good for you. Have support. You don't have to dig into the trauma stuff. But I just want to put that on there. Like, we have to take care of ourselves in storytelling. And we get asked to tell our stories all the way. As a side note, we get asked to tell our stories all the time by people who don't give a shit how it impacts me when I tell my story. We get put on platforms. We get put on stages. We get put up to represent recovery. And we get asked to tell our stories over and over and over and over. And not very many people are considering the impact on us when we're asked to do that. For-profit treatment centers and some non-profit treatment centers, right? The treatment industrial complex revolution, people. We need a revolution in the treatment industry complex, right? The treatment industrial complex. Putting people up. They just graduated. Oh, look at Johnny. Johnny has 90 days. Oh, I'm so grateful for Mountainside. I got everything I needed. We even got to go horseback riding, and now life is great because I have 90 days. They're using and exploiting Johnny. Johnny doesn't know what the impact of doing that really is going to be on him. So we get exploited all the time. How did I get over there on that topic? Anyways. Because you have to take care of yourself in storytelling, you have to consider. I showed that video rather than telling the story live because I'm going to tell you another story in a minute, and it's too much for me to share both stories live. It's too hard. Because I'm deeply connected to the stories and I'm feeling them as I'm telling them to you. And I need to take care of myself. And I don't think we think about that very much. And we need to. Grab a flashlight and a friend. It is dark in these corners. Get a flashlight and a friend. but get gnarly, because that's where the really, really good stuff is and the really powerful stuff. And the last one, tell from your scars. Very first storytelling class I took, a guy named Steve Almond said, tell from your scars, not from your wounds. Think about that for a minute. Tell from your scars, not your wounds. If you're bleeding out all over the place here, if I'm bleeding all over you, you're going to have to take care of me. And then what are you getting out of that? Poor her. Oh, she's such a mess. You have to take care of her. Right? That's not an effective way to tell stories. Make sure you have some distance, some perspective. You've done some work. It takes me years to get stories to the point where you saw the one about my dad. I was telling that story for years before I put it on video, because I wasn't ready to share it in public. So I'm going to share one with you now. And I grabbed a flashlight and a friend. I've been telling this story since 2017 in different ways. And I was going to tell it at the Multiple Pathways of Recovery Conference in Florida in January of 2020, I think it was. No, I don't know idea. Actually, I have no idea what year. Maybe 22? But I was with my storytelling facilitator and good friend, Carrie. So she was with a friend, and she had the flashlight, and we sat in the front of a rented minivan, in the front seat of a rented minivan in a really dingy, horrible motel parking lot. And she helped me get gnarly and peel back the layers. And the story radically changed. The CEO's voice rang out across the huge cavernous open space that was the women's unit at the Cumberland County Jail. Lock in. I hear the groans ripple through the room. The women are pissed. You see, we get very little time outside of our cells, so anything that makes us go back to our cells, like, we're angry. And I'm the reason we're going back to our cells. So everybody trudges back, and once we're all in our cells, the door's shut and the bolt slides into place. Shh, click. And it's time to wait. And I'm nervous and I'm anxious and I'm pacing like I am every single day. I hate this wait. Until finally I hear it. This horrible buzzing, grating sound that means that somebody's being led onto the unit. So I look through my little slit window in the door. And I see her, the nurse, coming into the room. She's impeccably dressed. Her hair is perfectly coiffed, and she's got a little white bottle in her hand. And she takes the long walk across the big middle of the room, stops dead in center where everybody can see her. Shh! My door pops open, and I step out onto the metal gangplank that's the walkway for the top tier. There's 2 tiers. And I start to make my way down the gangplank, down the stairs. And my little canvas slip-on shoes, one blue and one orange, because that's all they had in my size, rang out with every step. Clang, clang, clang. I get to the bottom, I go, and I meet the nurse in the middle. She doesn't look at me. She doesn't see the scabs on my face. She doesn't see how long it's been since I've had a haircut. She doesn't see how scrawny and skinny I am. She doesn't care. She just looks at my badge to make sure I'm the right inmate number, and she hands me the bottle. And I take that bottle and I drink back every last drop. And I hand it back to her, and I start to turn to go back to my cell, and that's when I feel it. The baby kick. And it's a reminder of what's happening right now. I'm 5 months pregnant. I'm on methadone. I'm in county jail with no bail, looking at a 2-year prison sentence. When I found out that I was pregnant, I went to the methadone clinic and I said, I have to get off methadone, I'm pregnant, I gotta taper off right now. And they said, no, you can't. It's not safe. And I said, no, I gotta get off of it. I don't want my daughter born on it, I have to get off of it. And they said, no, you can't. It's not safe. I want, with every fiber in my being, to be a good mother. I want my daughter's life to be different. This is not what I want for her. I make my way back to my cell. Clang, clang, clang. And I get inside, and the door shuts behind me. Shh, click. And I'm trapped in there with nothing but myself and my feelings. Fear, loneliness, humiliation, self-loathing, and the belief that I don't deserve a child. And there's nothing I can do about it. Thank you. That is a form of storytelling that binds me to you. Maybe you found a part of you in me that you did not know, or that you didn't have words for. We can tell our stories a different way. We can tell them in a way that binds us, not just within recovery, but outside of recovery. We can shift the culture with our stories when we're ready. This is not easy work. It's not terrible work either, but it's work. And when we're ready, we can shift the culture of storytelling for ourselves, from distortion to truth, from shame to compassion, from being defined by my past and my struggle to being in the present and looking at the future. And when we're ready, we can also shift the culture of recovery by doing that. And we need a culture shift. We do. We can create a tapestry of stories that bind us all together. We can change the entire culture by changing the way that we tell stories. Because we change ourselves by changing our stories. I no longer need to be defined by a single narrative. I no longer need to be defined by the worst things that ever happened to me. I am a human. I do not want to be an addict for the rest of my life. I don't even want to just be a person in recovery for the rest of my life. And that may sound crazy, but I want to be more than that. I just want to be a person. I just want to be a frickin' person. And live a life that is bigger and more beyond recovery. And I can do that by finding the human in my stories. Thank you all for listening to me. I hope you join me for the workshop so you get to try this out a little bit. Let's change recovery, y'all.